We do have Mr. Ajit Narasimhan, the Chief Marketing Officer from Sundaram MF, who would be joining us virtually. And Ajit has over 17 years of professional experience leading high-performing business development and product management teams in MF and FinTech, as I can read. Ajit, you're passionate about cricket and you enjoy, implementing your learnings from sport into your domain. That's interesting to know. Golf, poker, economics and technology keep him happy. And very beautifully, I would like to share with everyone that Ajit also works very closely to support several causes, primarily the education of those underprivileged. So on that note, Ajit, please join us, speak to us, and let us know from which part of the country you're joining us. Let's give it up for Ajit, please, everyone. Thank you.
So we were in the first slide. I assume we heard the first part of it, the why. The second part of it, like I mentioned, is the entire transaction between the brand, the product, and the experience. In any transaction, there are these three key components that interact. And what happens is, when the three interactions happen, there is a place where the three overlap, right? And the overlapping part is where the core of the value proposition typically lies. It's like an onion, right? As you keep peeling, at the core of it is where there is some fair amount of meat, and that is where the value proposition is. And typically, the value proposition will have two components. One is the problem statement that you're trying to solve for your customer in mind. That is the first aspect. But it's not just the problem that you want to solve. It is the intent and the belief that we have that is the best solution for that customer. So these two things play a significant role in what a company or an individual's or a brand's value proposition can potentially be, right? So it is essentially a unique identity that you have for that particular problem statement. And then the second part of it is that the entire situation needs to be looked at from a problem-solving approach. Am I solving a customer's need? Am I solving a customer's pain point? Right? And when these two match and when these two synergize, that will typically throw up your value proposition, and that is how we define a value proposition at a brand or a company or an individual level. Now, why is value proposition relevant? Now, in this context, what I've tried to do is to look at the context that we are in today, and look at the financial services market, for example. We know it's a very crowded place. There are, in the AMC world, 40, 45 plus, counting every day, AMCs coming up. The distribution world is extremely crowded. And more importantly, the buyer world, investor world, either the existing investors or prospective investors, the denominator in India just keeps getting larger and larger with more people coming in, right? So that's going to only keep increasing. But what happens here is high demand for products and services. More importantly, there are very nuanced, customized, bespoke demands at a customer level. Not every customer has the same need. Wealth creation is a very broad basket, but as you break this down demographically, as you break this down by segment, each individual has a very different set of needs, right? So when you put all of them into a very crowded marketplace, what happens? The seller needs to be noticed, right? So one of the challenges that I see is that a lot of people believe, and this is not restricted to our industry, right? Just go beyond the mutual fund industry, look at any other industry. Typically, people believe that the best way to get noticed is to scream, right? So in marketing or branding, is to go and build out visibility, right? You think that the moment I open a social media page, if I'm visible, people think I'm relevant and buyers are going to buy me, or I'm noticed. That's one part of it, right? It's important for the seller to be noticed, but more importantly, the buyer should know that the seller is relevant. That is where the value comes in. Otherwise, you can keep screaming as much as you want, and the person that you believe should be watching you, should be looking at you, will never see you. So the most important thing is to be noticed from a seller's point of view, but understanding what the buyer wants, what is the customer's needs, where is the customer coming from, how should the customer be fulfilled. When you marry these two things together, the value proposition becomes extremely relevant. So, just to give you a couple of case studies, examples very quickly, I'm conscious of time. What I've done is to move away from financial services, look at some industries that we're very familiar with, especially in the last few years. We've consumed some of the products from these brands. Take Apple, for example. When I kicked off, I mentioned about how value proposition evolves. Right? You take Apple. when they relaunched Apple as Apple, from what we see of it with the iPod in the early 2000s, Apple basically made a commitment to say, look, we can innovate and disrupt tech, right? There's a very popular saying that Steve Jobs never trusted the market research study that told him not to launch an iPhone because consumers did not resonate well to using touchscreen phones, right? But Steve Jobs says, to hell with market research. He felt that he knows what the customer wants because the customer has never tasted something like this. That's on cutting edge innovation. But what's happened post that, if you look at what's happened in the last 7-8 years with the proliferation of smartphones, especially with the big Google coming in, the Android explosion that we've seen, Apple realized very quickly that cutting edge innovation, the entry barrier is so low, that's not a sustainable game to play. So they pivoted very clearly to privacy, right? So early on, the adopters of Apple products were similar to Harley Davidson. They were cult buyers, right? You wanted to buy a cutting-edge, innovative product. But today, as Apple says, look, we want to be more mainstream, we want to cater to more mass audience. We see what's happening in India, the growth that we're seeing over the last 18 to 24 months, right? The value proposition has evolved to privacy, right? So they very clearly say that you have control over what you share. And if you talk to most Apple buyers today, and Apple buyers who are converted from Android, they will tell you the reason why they converted to Apple was because of privacy, right? So the very clear value proposition is that. I'll skip Amazon. I think Amazon most of us know, but the interesting thing about Amazon is that through a very single, master value prop, a headline value prop, they cater to both buyers and sellers, right? It is not just a buyer platform; it is not a seller platform. Uber was a very interesting case study, right? Uber basically came from a very clear need that people had, that people said, look, at the middle of the night, I'm not able to find a taxi. And the easiest is I really wish I was able to tap on my phone and get a taxi. And that's where the need arrived. And Uber instead, has stood that test of time by saying, look, with a click of a button, we can get you a cab. And they actually go on to say, I can promise you a cab in 4 minutes turnaround, right? I'm not talking about success of businesses here. I'm coming purely from a marketing point of view, from a value proposition, brand point of view. This is what these sort of brands stand for. The final example, very quickly, is on Google. If you go back and look at how Google launched, right? Google basically said the internet has a whole bunch of information around the world, and we are going to find a way to make this more streamlined so that we can put context to it and you'll be able to find information that you're looking for. So every single Google product that they launch is around contextual information that is relevant to you, right? So Google makes that promise. So now how do we go about finding your value proposition? We looked at some case studies, we looked at how we define value proposition, why we believe is relevant specifically in our industry. Now, if I were to look at mutual fund distribution as an example, right, given where most of us come from, in this industry, I think it's very important for us to define a value proposition, keeping in mind 4 key points. Who are you is one very clear point that we need to answer, right? What do you want to stand for from a value point of view? Right? Because it's a commoditized industry. We all sell the same proposition, we all sell the same product, we all sell similar categories. There may be few people who sell specific categories, that is different. But even in that, it's a crowded place, right? So what is the value that you stand for? What are the services that you offer, right? Are you offering all products? Are you offering specific products? Are you offering asset allocation? Are you catering to life's aspirations? Is there a way we can look at specific services within your broad offerings? The other two are extremely critical. What is your process? In process, it's very important to look at segments. I'll come to the segmentation part in the next slide. But in terms of what is your process, it becomes very crucial for you to define how are you going to sell your product, how are you going to approach your product to specific customer segments. It becomes very critical to define that because different segments will need different ways of approaching. The final thing is, what do we believe is the reason why a client should hire us? Right? So there's a little, there's a very important piece on research, understanding what is competition doing. So then how do we differentiate ourselves from competition? Understand why should a customer come to me vis-a-vis going to someone else? Now if you're able to answer these 4 broad questions, what will typically happen is that this will land up being a 50-word answer collectively, right? 25 words per question. We'll land up with 50 to 60 words or 4-5 sentences. That's perfectly fine, but that's the way we need to start. Once we clear this, we go into what is popularly known as the value proposition canvas. Now, you could look at you could Google this out. What I have done is to is to customize this specifically to our need, because the canvas is a fairly intensive concept which any marketing professional will kind of start off with, right? But we can do this ourselves. The first thing is look at the investor segmentation canvas, right? 4 quadrants, very clearly what is the need of the customer, draw personas of each segment that you want, right? So are we talking about, and this could be different cuts, this could be investor segment, age-wise, it could be income-wise, it could be geography-wise. I believe geography is not very relevant in the current context because everything is now virtual. The best thing is you could service a client sitting in the south of India to the north of India or the other way around. So I think geography has evolved again over time. But needs are very important, right? What is the needs of that particular investor segment? What is the investor looking for? Is the investor looking for retirement income? Is the investor looking for life aspiration? Are they looking at SIP as a product? Various nuances around needs. What is the customer expecting from it, right? Here we need to probe this a bit further because and this I want to go back to the Apple example. A lot of customers don't know what to expect, right? We have a role to play in that, right? We have a role in educating customers, in educating investors to understand what their expectations can possibly be. Understand their pain points. Some people will say, look, I want to create a corpus of X amount of money, but I only have so much of cash flow coming. Right? How do I go about doing this? So maybe there's an expectation mismatch, there's a need expectation mismatch as well, right? So we need to figure out what the exact pain points are. And the final thing is investing behavior. Behavior becomes a very, very critical aspect in terms of identifying if your 1, 2, 3 are actually very true. Because behavioral aspects will throw up whether you believe you know the customer well enough. Are you getting to understand the customer deep enough based on your interactions? Is the customer telling you the truth or not? We don't know those things, but behavior will throw up those signs. But once you plot these, just the 4x4 quadrant or in the canvas, basically investor mapping, right? You will then have to transition to creating a value map. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a hard, quantifiable aspect or a trait or an attribute. This is an intangible attribute, right? So it becomes a value exercise that you have to create from the segment you've created in the initial chart, right? What are the solutions that you want to build for the needs, expectation, pain points, investing behavior? What are the solutions that you believe you are hitting, right? What are the benefits? Now, if you solve something, there should be a corresponding benefit as well. Only then does the solution make sense. If there is no benefit, the solution does not make sense. And are you overcoming the pain point for the customer? Lack of cash flow, but he still wants a significant corpus at the end of a certain period. How are you going to address that? Right? A customer says, look, I don't want to do things digitally, I want a physical meeting even if it's a 25,000 rupee check. How are you going to solve it? You can say, I don't want to solve those customers. That's perfectly fine. Then you throw that out. But it's important to understand the behavioral pattern of these customers. Once you arrive at this, what you'll understand is that in the earlier slide, if I can just go back, the earlier slide, you land up with about 50 odd words. When you put this together, you land up with about 15, 20 words. And the right hand side, you land up with maybe 10 words. Right? 10 very sharp, precise words what you land up with. Once you do this activity, I would urge all of us to test these propositions through any of our marketing channels that we have. And today, marketing channels are very different from what we had 2 years ago. I speak to a lot of you. All of you are very active on social. I think social media is a fabulous platform. I see a lot of you are already very active influencers on YouTube or Instagram, etc. So those are marketing channels. So as you start, once you build this, once you do this exercise, you'll find those 10 to 15 key attributes that you believe are potentially within these, the green boxes. And you start promoting that, and I say promoting not money, I'm saying start publicizing that through your platform that you're already familiar with. If you're not, that's a separate conversation. I would urge all of you to start building visibility on those platforms because that is the best way to reach out to existing customers, engage with new customers, talk about your expertise, etc. Right? What are the kind of customers you want? Are you getting more queries? Are you getting more people talking about you? When you have your Ask Me Anything kind of sessions, are more people attending your sessions, right? Then people will start building, and I know some of you already have very strong value proposition, right? This is for the larger audience as well. Once you start doing it, you start testing your hypothesis, whether you're actually playing it. Exercise is done, you will have to identify your value proposition in four meaningful ways. You have a headline and you have a visual, right? I'm not going to spend time on the other because there are very tactical points, but your value proposition should be very clear and easy to understand. It should not have too much of jargon, and it can also have a very strong identity. Logo, color palettes, any of this, right? We all talk about why you should not have certain very strong colors. Certain strong colors are linked with fear, etc. Some things can be attributed to greed. So, visual identity plays a significant role in the positioning that you want to kind of convey as well. I think we've talked about this, what we shouldn't be. I just want to clarify the first and the second point. A lot of people tend to kind of, confuse value proposition with slogan, taglines, and position statements. These are not the same. They are very different. A value proposition is typically a softer aspect and something that you stand for. You don't need to keep talking about it all the time. It is not necessarily something which goes along with your signature or your brand logo or a tagline. It's a much softer, subtler aspect of your positioning. So it is not a statement of purpose, statement of positioning, or a mission statement or a tagline. So it's very important for you to keep it that way. And the final important, I would say more of a hygiene is that don't keep it generic. Make it very specific. Make it as specific as possible. If you could go back to this slide, this will help you kind of bring in more, keeping it more specific rather than generic, right? And those are some of the best practices that we have seen in terms of how value proposition should be conceptualized. I have looked at 6 broad boxes which I believe some of you are already developing, somebody already stands for. Many of you will fill, some of these buckets itself. But I believe these are very relevant to all of us, right? Organizing, we all know how can I help organize my clients' financial needs, not restricted just to equities. It could be holistic asset allocation, etc. I know the bell is ringing, but I'll leave this here. So these are some of the key aspects that I believe you can look at. And finally, I would leave this slide for all of us to look at. I think this summarizes what a value proposition is, just to declutter ourselves in terms of how we want to look at it, right? It's something where ultimately you need to build this bottom up, look at the customer, and build your value proposition to see if you have the skill sets to, communicate and be that proposition to your customers' needs. So I'll stop here and happy to take any questions.
Ajit, I guess we're running out of time. So right now at this juncture, we would just say thank you to you for putting it so creatively and also for sharing in a way the secret sauce of how to find your value proposition, right?